As a real estate agent, I would never tell my clients to purchase a home that has a tenant in it. There are so many stories where buyers have had to find other styles of accommodations when they've taken possession of their property because the tenant has decided not to leave the home, even though they said they were going to. By the way, my name is Zamira Dunnet, and I'm a local real estate agent right here in the GTA, and I'm with eXp Realty. And if you have any questions about the buying process, you can contact me at any time. My phone number is right there in the description, right there. Go ahead and reach out because I am here to guide people and help them through this crazy process of purchasing a property in today's market. Now, let's jump into why you should never buy a property that is tenanted. When you are buying a home with existing tenants, you aren't just buying the property, you are actually taking on the tenant at the same time. All the rules and regulations that come with the landlord and tenant board are also brought on with this tenant. So, the number one and most important thing to check before putting an offer on a property with a tenant is what is the situation with the lease? Are they on month to month? Or are they actually in a signed lease agreement? Because if they are, you are taking on that lease agreement. You cannot kick this tenant out until that lease agreement is completed. And then the tenants automatically move over to month. And that is when you can potentially try to get these tenants out. Even if a listing states that they're going to provide vacant possession, there are things you can do to put in the agreement to protect yourself, but it may not actually happen. The rules of the landlord and tenant board state that you can take on possession of a property and remove the tenants if one, the owners are moving into the unit, or two, you want to make renovations to this property. But if this tenant is inside a lease agreement, you cannot kick them out. And this situation can cause multiple complications. Number one, it could delay your move in. I've heard of a story where someone actually had to go and rent a different property because they ended up buying a home that had tenants in it. And then the tenants decided not to leave and they had to find some sort of other accommodation while they went through the landlord and tenant board. Now, the landlord and tenant board has had a delay since 2020. So right now, that could be between 5 to 10 months of a wait that you're waiting to have a hearing for these tenants to vacate the property. And then you still have to wait about 30 to 60 days to then have them actually evicted. You never want to be put in a situation where you have to look for other styles of accommodations and pay rent somewhere else while you have just coughed up so much money to purchase a home. This is why I always say try to find a property that is vacant or that is owner occupied. Because when it's owner occupied, the owner is the one that is getting the funds for selling their property. There isn't someone added into the mix because a tenant doesn't really care if a landlord is selling their property. They are like, this is where I live. I don't want to leave. I don't want to pay more rent somewhere else because you've decided to sell. And as a buyer, you are, like I said at the beginning, you are taking on this tenant. It is part of the agreement. You cannot just ask them to leave immediately unless it's on month to month. And then there's no real lease agreement in play because they are month to month. But still, a tenant may still dispute it and say, I'm not leaving. With the backup of how the landlord and tenant board is currently for having court dates, how long will you be waiting for this person to leave the house anyways? Like I said, you are taking on this tenant. So if you are taking on this tenant, let's say you are purchasing this home because you want the tenant. Number one, a lot of investors want to find their own tenant. You don't know what this tenant was like in this home. You don't know how they treated the landlord, if they paid everything on time. This stuff is super important to know as well. So if you are purchasing a home for investments, I would still look for an empty home to then go ahead and purchase and then rent out yourself. But if you are getting a property where there is a tenant and you are doing this where you want to keep the tenant, there are things that you want to put in the agreement to make sure that you are protected. So number one, you want to read over the lease agreement to see what is there, what the conditions are, what the payment is per month, because you are going to take on all the terms of that agreement, and you are also going to take on the payments. So if this tenant has been there for 10 years and is paying $1,800 for a full house, that tenant will keep paying $1,800 for that full house. But if you're buying it as an investment and you are not moving into it and you are not doing renovations, you cannot kick this tenant out. And they say at the same payments that they are at. And then the only thing you can do is increase it by the governed amount that is given, which for 2025 is 2.5%. So again, I wouldn't buy a property like that has a style of tenant, that one, you don't know, that two, you take on the payments. What if the payments are really low? Number three, you don't know what type of tenant they are. You want to vet your own to make sure you're getting a good tenant. So again, this is another reason why I would stay away from purchasing a home that has a tenant in it. Now, if you are purchasing a home that has a tenant in it because you see that it has a really good price, you're getting a really good deal on this property, and you're like, you know what? I will take on the situation where this agent says that I'm going to get vacant possession, and I'm going to hope for the best. What you do when you hope for the best is you put in conditions and clauses in this agreement to protect yourself for when they provide vacant possession. Number one, you're putting in this agreement that you're receiving vacant possession. Okay. Like I said, you want to protect yourself through this process, and you want to make sure that it's there in writing. The one thing I put in on every agreement to protect you, it kind of still isn't the best situation, but it at least gets you out of the situation if you don't get vacant possession. I put in the agreement that if the tenant is not out by X date, the seller has 30 more days to try to get this tenant out. If that tenant is still not out after those 30 days, we get to walk away from the deal. We do not take on this property at all. If the property is not vacant by then too bad, we're out of the deal. Because you don't want to be left with a situation where you are now trying to still get a tenant out. I literally heard a story where someone had a tent in the backyard and they lived in the tent because the tenants would not leave the house. So having a clause in there that basically gets you out of this agreement, if this tenant does not leave by X date, and then they get 30 more days, and if they don't get out by that date, then you literally can walk away from this deal. It's kind of crappy because you just waited maybe 30, 60, 90 days to find out if this property ends up being vacant. And then you have to just walk away from the deal. Everyone gets out home free, kind of unfortunately, because you've been waiting to see if you get this property and now it's not vacant. So now you have to go and start looking for a house again. It may cause a bit of a situation. And again, this is why I don't literally tell people to get properties that have tenants in it, because you don't want to wait this long to find out if a property gets a vacant possession and then you find out it doesn't. And now you have to go back to the drawing board. What if prices are higher now? What if you can't get a property at that price anymore? Like, there's so many factors. But to protect you, if you are purchasing a property that has a tenant in it, that is the clause you put in so that you at least walk away if they don't empty the property. Now, if they do get vacant possession for you, I always suggest to have closing maybe 10 to 15 days after they actually leave. So that 30-day additional, you then do closing date about 15 days after that, because you want to walk through the home. You want to see if the tenant has damaged anything. What if they had a pet? You want to make sure that nothing has happened to this home, and you want to give the seller enough time to fix these issues that are with this home, because you don't want to have the closing date maybe the day after they leave, because now all of those things that are wrong with this house, you have to take on, and you don't want to do that either. Now, after the seller has a firm deal from you, they are able to then provide the tenant with something called an N12. That N12 form informs the tenant that the buyer will be moving into the unit and that they need to vacate the property. At the same time as this N12 is being signed, you want to send the landlord and tenant board an L2. That L2 already starts the process potentially if the tenant decides not to leave. Yes, you may still have 2 months till the closing date, but you've at least given yourself that much of a buffer for when they don't leave, to then only have 3 months to 8 months left till you get a court date to get these people out. But again, sorry, I have to say, I don't advise to buy tenanted properties. It's crazy. You don't know what tenants can do. It actually is really sad because tenants have all the power in these situations and landlords really don't. So, yes, you may pay a little bit more to buy a property that isn't tenanted, but you literally get keys and access into your home immediately. You don't have to stress about anything. The other thing, too, is some landlords don't put appliances into the unit for these tenants, and then the tenants have to buy their own appliances. So, what if you were to offer, you say, I'm taking on fridge, stove, washer, dryer, all the appliances, and then you find out that all of those appliances are owned by the tenant. So now you have to go and purchase a whole bunch of appliances right after you just bought a new property. So there are a lot of negatives in this situation where I just advise people not to move in that direction. I really don't even see a moment, even as an investor, and like you want to get a tenant into that home. I really don't see a positive in purchasing a property with a tenant already in it. Because, like I said a little while ago, you don't know anything about this tenant. You don't know, like, the landlord might say, oh, they've been perfectly fine, but he's just trying to sell. How do you know? How do you know it's the truth? There are just so many uncertainties when it comes to purchasing a property with a tenant that I just say, don't do it. But that is my information to you. I've given you all the facts that I can give you about this process when it comes to purchasing a property with a tenant in it. And then you make your decision on your own from there. But I'm here to try to guide people to the best of my ability in their best interest. And I don't see anything that helps a buyer when it comes to purchasing a property with a tenant in it already. I hope this video gave you enough information about that process when it comes to purchasing a property with a tenant in it. I really hope this helps you double think that process, write down the pros and cons, figure out if it is in your best interest to do so, and maybe just go for a little bit of a higher price when it comes to it so that you don't have to deal with all this situation. Thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope I was able to help you. If you like this video, please go ahead and subscribe to my channel. Go ahead and like this video, and I'll see you guys all next week.